Good morning to everyone. Today I am going to discuss Unit 2 of CSS-1, that is Grammar 1. In that I am going to discuss types of verbs. Verb. What is a verb? A verb is a word which describes an action, a state, a process, or an experience. That is, a verb refers to the action or condition of the subject. I'll explain you with the example. The thief jumped over the wall. Here jump is a verb. And another example, birds fly in the air. Here fly is a verb. It's very simple. I have already described what is a verb in the previous class. Again I am going to discuss what is a verb. As I said earlier, a verb refers to the action or condition of the subject. Here in the first example, the thief jumped over the wall. Jumped is an action word. And in the second example, birds fly in the air. Fly is an action word, so it is a verb. Now let us discuss about classification of verbs. Main verbs. In classification of verbs, there are two types. First one is main verbs and second one is auxiliary verbs. What do you mean by main verbs? Main verbs are those which denote action or state are called the main verb. Example 1, I am reading a novel. Here reading is a verb and it is a main verb. I am reading a novel is a main verb. Example 2, she likes apple. What she likes? She likes apple. It's very simple. Verb which denotes action or state are called the main verb. And second one is auxiliary verbs. What do you mean by auxiliary verbs? The words auxiliary means giving help or support to the main verb. Giving help or support to the main verb. That is called as an auxiliary verb. Let me explain with an example. Example 1, Amla is driving a car. In this, is an auxiliary verb because it is supporting the verb. What is a verb? Driving. Amla is driving a car. In this sentence, driving is a verb and auxiliary word is. Why is an auxiliary verb? Because as per the definition, the word auxiliary means giving help or support to the main verb. Second example, they are celebrating Diwali. Here auxiliary verb is or. In this sentence, the auxiliary verb is or because in this or is supporting the main verb, that is celebrating. Okay, we have discussed about main verb and auxiliary verb. Now I am going to discuss what is primary auxiliary and modal auxiliary. These two are auxiliary verbs types. In brief, what I have to explain is auxiliary verbs are of two types. Auxiliary verbs are two types. They are, first one is primary auxiliary and second one is modal auxiliary. Let us discuss about primary auxiliary. The verbs which can function both as main verbs and as auxiliaries are called as primary auxiliary. What is primary auxiliaries? The verbs which can function both as main verbs and as auxiliaries are known as primary auxiliary. It functions both, as I discussed about main verbs and auxiliary verbs. Example, is, are, am, was, were, have, has, had, will be, shall have, do, Does, did, will do, shall do are all the examples of primary auxiliaries. Example 1, I am a teacher. I am a teacher. This is called as main verb. And second example, I am going to the airport. Here auxiliary verb. I am going to the airport is an auxiliary verb. Here in the first example, I am a teacher. Am is a main verb. In the second example, I am going to the airport. Am is an auxiliary verb because it is supporting to the main verb. Going is a main verb, auxiliary verb. And next example, they are my friends. They are my friends. In this, or is a main verb. They are coming to my house tonight. Or is an auxiliary verb because it is supporting to the main verb coming. So you have to be careful when you are identifying main verb and auxiliary verb. Second one, modal auxiliaries. What do you mean by modal auxiliaries? The verb which functions as only auxiliaries and cannot be used as main verbs in a sentence are called modal auxiliaries. Modal auxiliaries means they will function as only auxiliaries and cannot be used as main verbs in a sentence. Those are called as modal auxiliaries. Example, can, could, may, might, will, would, and shall, should. Okay. Primary auxiliaries and modal auxiliaries have explained. Now, let us discuss about stative and dynamic verbs. What do you mean by static and dynamic verbs? Dynamic verbs. Dynamic verbs, sometimes referred to as action verbs, usually describes actions we can take or things that happen. Dynamic verbs are sometimes referred to as action verbs. Next, stative verbs. Stative verbs usually refers to a state or condition which is not changing or likely to change. Stative verb usually refers to a state or condition which is not changing or likely to change. Let me explain dynamic verbs. There are many types of dynamic verbs, but most of them describes activities or events which can begin and finish. Here are some examples. Play, eat, drink, go, type, read, write, listen, speak, watch, say, grow, work, sleep, cook, talk, etc. These are all dynamic verbs. Another one is stative verb. We cannot use stative verbs in the continuous, it is progressive forms. Example, you can't say Ram is wowing 3 cars. Vowing is a state, not an action, so it is always in the simple form. We can't use stative verbs in the continuous or progressive forms. And here examples of some common stative verbs. Examples of some common stative verbs: love, hate, like, see, hear, sound, think. Meaning having an opinion. Think means here we are considering have an opinion. Now I am going to explain dynamic verbs and static verbs with sentences examples. Now you will easily understand. Here sentence examples of dynamic verbs. First one, he drives carefully down the hill. He drives carefully down the hill. Why drives is called dynamic verb? Because dynamic verbs sometimes refers to as action verbs, usually describes actions we can take or thing that happens. Second example, she threw a stone at me angrily. She threw a stone at me angrily. Third example, Matthew is growing old. Growing is a dynamic verb. Stative verbs, sentence examples. What do you have to say about his behavior nowadays? Example 1, What do you have to say about his behavior nowadays? Second example, you seem too tired to continue working today. You seem too tired to continue working today. What do you mean by stative verb? Stative verb usually refers to a state or condition which is not changing or likely to change. So here, stative verbs in the first example, what do you have to say about his behavior nowadays? Have is a stative verb. Second example, you seem too tired to continue working today. Seem is an stative verb. Third example, do you know anything about verb? Here in this, no is a stative verb. Now let us discuss about transitive and intransitive verbs. Transitive verb, verbs that are used together with an object. The object can be thing or a person. Transitive verb means verbs that are used together with an object. The object can be a thing or a person. I'll explain with you an example. First example, Ravi owes Lakshmi some money. Ravi owes Lakshmi some money. Here owes is a transitive verb. Second example, she makes jewelry to sell at the market. She makes jewelry to sell at the market. Here transitive verb is make. Why it's make is a transitive verb? Because verbs that are used together with an object. The object can be a thing or a person. Next one is a finite verb. Next I am going to discuss about finite verbs. A finite verb can stand by itself. Oh, next one is, let me explain you with another example. What is a finite verb? Now finite verb, transitive verb. Okay, before going to finite verb, I have to discuss about intransitive verb. Intransitive verb, verbs that do not have an object of their own are called intransitive verbs. Verbs that don't have an object of their own are called intransitive verbs. In most cases, they are followed by an adverb, adjective. I'll repeat it once again. Intransitive verb, verbs that do not have an object of their own are called intransitive verb. Whereas for transitive verb, verbs that are used together with an object are called transitive verb. Examples of intransitive verb. First one, I sleep happily is an example of intransitive verb. Here sleep is an intransitive verb. Second example, he goes to Bangalore. Goes is an intransitive verb. Third example, she looks beautiful. It is an intransitive verb, where look is an intransitive verb. Now let us discuss finite verbs and non-finite verbs. Finite verbs and non-finite verbs. Finite verbs, a verb which changes according to the tense, number and person is called finite verb. A verb which changes according to the tense, number and person is called finite verb. Example, sentence examples. First one, he appears sick. Second example, Jane promised to change her behavior. Third example, Ganesh said that she enjoyed learning more about verbs. I'll explain finite verbs after discussing non-finite verbs. Non-finite verbs, you can call them unfinished verbs. Can't. Non-finite verbs, you can call them unfinished verbs. Can't. Sentence example, the fallen star. It is an example of non-finite verb. Second example, the deserted building. This is a non-finite verb. Non-finite verb means you can call them unfinished verbs. Now, as I said earlier, I am going to discuss about finite verbs. A finite verb can stand by itself as the main verb of a sentence. In other words, We can define a finite verb can stand by itself as the main verb of a sentence. Sentence example. First one is the plane demolished the building. Example, the plane demolished the building is an example. And second example, her hair was black and silky. Example 2, her hairs are